Good morning, Samoa, and welcome to Star Trek Strange New Worlds, Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera, where the joke was going to be the series that has suddenly and unexpectedly become the second best Star Trek, albeit not through its own actions. I don't know if that's not the joke anymore. You'll see why. But yeah, first, before we get into anything Strange New Worlds, I have to acknowledge that in like the last few days, Star Trek Prodigy has been canceled. Season 2 was supposed to come out later this year. What's going to happen is they're going to finish post-production on Season 2 and attempt to sell Prodigy off to some rival service. And then, well, imminently, like within the next few days, Star Trek Prodigy is going to be removed from Paramount Plus and not broadcast on Nickelodeon. I did a live stream yesterday on this so that all of this Strange New Worlds time would not be spent on Prodigy. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit at the end of the live stream. I anticipated having a lot to talk about. I'm not sure how much I'm going to have to talk about. But, yes, I did want to announce that in case you are not aware. But, let's get into Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera. Welcome to one of the best Star Trek episodes in the past 20 years. Honestly, I don't give these out, lightly. I think I've only done this 4 times before. But please, I don't actually have a graphic, but please enjoy your Perfection Award, Star Trek Season 2, Episode 2, Ad Astra per Aspera, being so perfect that I don't actually know what I'm gonna fill the commentary with. I am unreasonably harsh on Strange New Worlds. That's the word I will use. I don't mean that I am more harsh on it than any other series. That's not true. There are definitely far worse television, far worse Star Treks that I will have bigger criticisms on. But as anyone who watches these streams know, I think Strange New Worlds has a lot of fundamental problems, and I rank it lower than it deserves. I often complain about those problems more than they deserve, and that complaint doesn't come out of any kind of hatred. That complaint comes out of love, like some sort of cliched abusive parent in television. That I critique Strange New Worlds because I've said plenty of times, I think Strange New Worlds is a good, day or two meeting, sit down of all the writers and people who make it, to becoming the best Star Trek ever made. Just figuring out what worked, what didn't, how do we make this show better. This episode was Strange New Worlds with none of the problems. And beyond not having any of the fundamental problems, it was an incredibly well-executed episode. An incredibly well-executed exploration, discussion, court case of incredibly pertinent issues done simultaneously so real, so I'll get into all those little things, but also so genericized is to always be relevant to any kind of persecution. There are just so many little amazing ways. It was directed amazingly. It was done amazingly. I was gripped the entire time. There are little general things, like even Spock. We don't talk about Spock, but Spock was Spock throughout this episode. The little things like he's not clapping at the end. He's the only one who doesn't clap. This little thing about the emotional outburst. Everyone was giving their things. Like, did you ever believe that Una Chin Riley was hiding something? And everyone's like, no. And I'm like, really? Like, not the genetic engineering, but you don't mean there's any, like, a surprise birthday party they were hiding, or anything like that. And then Spock was all pedantic about, like, oh, yes, I suspected she was hiding a love of musicals. But, then to the far, actually, more meatier stuff of, like, oh god, I don't know the prosecutor's name or the defendant's name. But the defendant is, like, not allowed at all to, let's say, attack April. That gets shut down immediately, even though, especially at the beginning, it's a very reasonable line of inquiry. However, the Vulcan prosecution is able to go to town attacking Captain Pike, despite the exact same... it's the exact same thing. Like, Captain Pike is not on trial here. If they ever want to try Captain Pike, you go ahead, but do it some other day. There was... Oh god, I had the great example. There was, Robert April used the, he said the Prime Directive was different from the genetic engineering ban because, the ruling on genetic engineering exists to save lives and protect people, prevent genocide and mass death, which is exactly what the Prime Directive exists to do. It exists to prevent mass death and genocide on pre-warp planets, but we're not allowed to explore that. We're not allowed to explore the fact that that argument applies to both. The court case, I think everyone, shields up, red alert. Like, for the first time ever, I think this may be like a perfect court case. I mean, the prosecution's very first words are a slippery slope logical fallacy. But, I mean, they are essentially arguing for prejudice. Like, the whole eugenics thing is a slippery slope logical fallacy. And that was the only... But everything else is like, no, this is a good court case. Like, I don't have any complaints. In the first half of the episode, I was going to say, if I have... my only complaint about this episode, my only potential problem with it, is that it should be set 150 years from now. But once Una took the stage and we got this whole thing, I was like, no, I finally see the value in having this story set smack dab where this is actually, like, you would have these kind of stories and this kind of prejudice that I just don't think would be around to this severity, like after Bashir and around Prodigy. Flawless. I mean, this is the first time, genuinely, I think this is the first time I'm actually going to give out a perfection award, but without the caveat that, like, yeah, there might be some little things, there might be some problems, but it's good enough to call it perfect. I think this actually might be my first, no, this one actually is perfect. I legitimately can't think of a single way to improve it, which is remarkable. Like, even the best thing, it's like, I don't know, I think this shot should be better lit, but, like, nope, it was well done. I never thought I'd see the day. Jack's Law is what I asked for the episode. We have to look... I don't know why I struggle sometimes with comments. It's what I asked for. The episode, we have to look why we like it so much. I wanted not to like it, but it was good. I went into this episode like, I am very much on this episode's side, like with the eugenics stuff. That's always been a dumb, nonsensical rule. We'll get into this. There's a great scene, even for me personally, where I was like, no, you know what? You're right. Like, there is some level of prejudice to this genetically, and I mean, right now, pretty much entirely fictional genetically engineering prejudice. But, yeah, I didn't go in expecting to absolutely love it, because I'm like, it's Strange New Worlds. It's a court case. Like, this could be great, or they could fumble it, but I was not expecting the first genuine perfection award. Like, I legitimately will have to... I'm on a quest in this live stream to find a single problem with this episode. Like, gosh, I'd have to. well, we all know how it would look for Pike, but when she showed how it would be for all of them with her first captain, if there was no law in their way, it was when a law is wrong. Yes. That's... I mean, ultimately, that's kind of the perspective this is taking. It's doing so much. It's doing a great exploration of how prejudice can manifest. That's not the word. It's basically all the different ways you can react living in a world with prejudice, because you have all the strange new world, the Enterprise crew, how aren't prejudiced, like to the point where I complained about it in the first season, that it had seemed weird to have such a huge group of people who were like totally devoid of this kind of prejudice. Hang on, the dog is eating something. What are you eating? What is this? What is it? Come, mate. That's the oven mitt. We have to keep buying those. Yeah, but you have Leon, who has her own prejudice essentially against herself. But, you know, the different ways to deal with it, from Una Jin Riley, from Leon, from the defendant. You have April, who actually does change his mind. He's very much the, no, genetic engineering is, like, inherently dangerous, and I wouldn't give Una, access to these positions. You have I'm only doing my job, like, constantly going, I didn't ask for this assignment, but I'm doing the best I can within the confines of the law, which isn't a bad stance. Like, it's the same stance as Pike and all these people, but not willing to go outside the law. Like, it's a very nuanced, complicated thing. It had all the sides, really, which you don't see a lot in these kind of explorations. Even in Star Trek, it's very rare to kind of get all these demonstrations. And all of it is show don't tell. Every single one, every single thing is show don't tell. Everything is done so naturally. The entire exchange when Una's on here is all done with Una just... It's not the trial. It's Una talking to her friend about why she joined Starfleet, why she did all these things. That's never said. The audience is just trusted to pick up on that. And all of it's still tying into that later resolution of grant her asylum, basically. That's why I was having a hard time at the start. It felt like they should have solved this by then. The eugenics stuff, it's prejudice. I mean, yeah, they probably should have, but I think this episode also, for the first time ever, does an amazing job explaining why that prejudice is there. Enterprise maybe tried a bit because they were far, like, the eugenics wars to Enterprise are gonna be like World War II to now. It's very separated from where I am, but it's still recently enough and in living memory that I'm very much affected by World War II. But this one, the story of... I mean, it does rely a little bit on the retcon of the eugenics wars and World War III becoming the same thing. But you can still also interpret it as the eugenics wars were kind of the start of the path to World War III. Kind of like how you could interpret World War I is the start of World War II, if you wanted to. But that path, that the eugenics wars can be seen as a start to the path of World War III and the total collapse of society on Earth. And it is that collapse of society that led to utopia, that led to the Federation. It helps explain why this eugenics argument is so Earth-focused. It explains why you would tie banning the eugenics so hard to maintaining utopia. Like, they're trying to prevent the one thing that they founded utopia in defiance of. Yeah, not wanting the ideals of the show to look bad. I think Stranger Worlds succeeded here because, I mean, Starfleet's not an ideal organization, but it does try to be. we know Starfleet. I suppose we don't know that they ever get that ideal with genetic engineering, but it seems almost inevitable when we fast forward 100 or so years to Julian and Dal, and a bunch of other stuff. Like, you have this law, the law that's in the book by some. I mean, it was going to be the one thing I had to say until the defendant just flat out said it. Like, that one beautiful person who wrote down these laws, in case Starfleet ever failed, in case you'd ever have a scenario where someone like Una was on trial for some kind of prejudice. They'd be like, no, here's your out. Like, I'm going to do everything in my power to write these laws into the very Constitution. I mean, that's why we have the civil rights laws that we do, is so we can avoid situations like this, or at least do our best to. The same time, the trial where Data has a child in the court case over his rights. Data has a child. Oh, there is a little bit of. I don't think that's a court case. That's more a discussion. But I haven't seen that one in a while. I don't think that's not like Measure of a Man though, where you spend 40 minutes in a courtroom. But it's a very similar vein. But as much as everyone loves Measure of a Man, everyone will rip the entire like legal proceedings to shreds. Like, most of the people don't even think they think this should be a resolved issue. Measure of a Man's got some pretty good things, but it's really not a good court case scene. It's just so well put together that you can go along with it anyway. And also, Measure of a Man is simplistic. Like in the 80s, I'm sure it's not an original idea, but that kind of AI sentience rights thing, it's kind of in its infancy. We've had 40 years or so to develop that idea and explore that idea. You can get a lot more nuance out of it. Technology in the real world has advanced enough that you can do more with it. And so going back, it seems very nuanced to just like, Data's a machine. Does that mean he's alive? Whereas this, as I said, pretty much manages to explore everything about how prejudice can exist in a world, how people might react, while also being an incredibly solid court case that also manages to justify some things in Star Trek, explore them amazingly, both the fictitious things and the real world prejudice, and do great work for what I think is, I've said before, I mean, we're on the path. This sort of stuff is gonna become a real issue, like probably within my lifetime. It kind of the same way people will look at old, what's the one? The Gabriel Bell stuff, like where they go back to, I think last year with the sanctuary districts and all that, and they'll point to like California or the homeless problems in a lot of other cities like Seattle, whatnot, and be like, this was so relevant, it was so ahead of its time. I think that this episode is gonna be that. Like, this episode will be that when these sort of things actually start coming up and becoming issues. Yeah, but at the same time, the trial... yada yada. Oh my god, I did like this one, and it is more than I could put to words. Yes, AI has come so far. Yeah, but we're not Data, but, we know we've got a better understanding of how technology... Like, you can make the same arguments that our AIs, like chatbots and artbots and whatever, you could pretty easily draw some parallels to, like, Data-level AIs, how they might interact in society and potentially take away jobs, whatever. But, yeah, I mean, the problem I'm facing as a reviewer is I think this episode explored prejudice so incredibly well that I have nothing to add. I can't add anything to the discussion on prejudice because it just did it so thoroughly and so amazingly. So instead, I believe I'm gonna... there's some core scenes I didn't want to talk about, talk about some of the general Star Trek stuff, and also just some of the great ways that very show don't tell that maybe you missed out on, but I just think are so good. I want to explore them. So if you get through ahead, this I actually did find interesting, but it does kind of make sense where that. Let's get a more flattering frame. There we go. That plea bargain of like 2-year drop all charges, 2 years in a Federation prison, which is, like summer camp basically, and they were surprisingly light. But then thinking about it, I guess it does make sense. Like the whole thing about genetic engineering that does come up is that Paramount Plus is that this came up with Julian a lot, is that you can't really punish Julian for what his parents did. You can punish Una for lying to Starfleet, sure, but not being genetically engineered herself. But I don't want to spend too much on this because it's missing the point. If you spend a lot of time talking about the actual ethics of how you should persecute those charges, you're missing the point of the episode. Anything else? Yeah, I was hoping for a little more discussion here, maybe. I thought for sure Pike was gonna come in at the end, and do something. Like, when they started actually bringing him up, the reason he didn't go to the courtroom is he couldn't be, like, if he admitted to knowing that Una was a Larian, the case would have become about him, and it would have stopped being a civil rights case. Which is exactly what the Vulcan guy tried to do at the end. But I can see why, is a prejudice story, you probably want Allurians to resolve this. You wouldn't want Pike in it. It is interesting that we've had 2 rather Pike-light episodes. I mean, he's not the main character. Star Trek should be an ensemble cast, and if this story didn't need him, fine. But it is kind of interesting. I wonder if there's some really Pike-heavy stuff we're going to get later. Are sure they're going to put Pike on the stand? Yeah, like some kind of, Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits. But, I mean, you shouldn't... the problem that often comes up in things like Star Trek and Doctor Who, when you tackle prejudice and you tackle racism and you tackle stuff like that, is that you can't solve racism with a nice speech. Like, whenever you do an episode like this, the resolution can't be, we did it, everybody, we solved racism. That would feel hollow, that would feel cheap, that would undermine everything, that would be unrealistic. Look at the United States. Like, legally, in law, equal rights comes far before a lack of prejudice. And even then, I'm sure that some people are going to want to call me out, like some places where the law isn't equal. And I think I liked that about here, where obviously, even for... this one's worse, because for canonical reasons, you can't solve racism, because it still exists in the future. But this was a good getting her off on a technicality so the show could happen that didn't feel cheap. I mean, what they did is they turned the decision at the end, I was going to talk about this later, but they turned the decision at the end to a very clear... no one's going to deny that Una broke the law. She did. She is guilty of breaking the law. That's not the thing that's in question. But the law equally says Una has asked for asylum. Like, that's... you could make some semantics that she didn't intend to, but everyone knows that clearly the intent of the law was to save people like Una. And you had enough buildup, I think, over the case. Oh god, I'm not recording. I'm gonna have to download this episode after the stream. That it became a very simple, you can follow the law and persecute someone, or you can follow the law and save someone. Like, what do you want to do? And if I were to change one thing, here's my way to make it better. Is I might have done like a To Kill a Mockingbird style. They still make the right decision. I say the right decision. They still make the same decision. Yes, the right decision, but it's a much harder, like longer decision. Kind of like closed doors. There's a little line, maybe a bit cliched. Like they've been in there for hours, like going over the evidence and stuff. Maybe it did feel a little quick, but there's also a cut where I think there is implied time between this scene and when they make the decision. I might have made that I would have made that bit more obvious. There you go. I found my complaint. I found my way to make it better. um, Where am I going? She put a captain, but no, you can show her the... Me too, there you go. I was sure they were going to put Pike on stand. Yeah, after she put so much on her old captain, no, but you can show where the people who should stand up for where the law should be broken, and why that change needs to happen now. And how now you can put him in a bad light after putting so much on the last captain. She was unfair. Are you talking about Una being unfair? Yeah, this might have been something to make more clear for new viewers as well. But they addressed it when Una was on the stand. But they have all their hand on that little light thing. That's the lie detector from TOS. That little lie thing. So she literally could not lie. Like she had to out Pike. Everyone knows she had to out Pike. But that scene also serves as the prejudice. Like, the defendant can't go after April, but the prosecution can go after Pike. And yeah, I'm not sure I'd agree with you here. I don't think she was unfair to Pike at all. I mean, Pike knew what he was getting into as well. Like, everyone in this situation knew what they were getting into. Pike made the choice to defend Una, and if he's gonna be put on the stand for that, then by God is he willing to be put on the stand for that. The only reason Pike didn't go, like, Pike would be perfectly happy to say, I harbored Una. The reason he didn't is because then the trial would become about him. And you're not doing a civil rights case. Like, it's worse for Illyrians and for Una if the case becomes about Pike, and that's why he didn't go. Not because he didn't want to out himself, but because it's worse for Una if he does. Court seemed too one-sided. Well, that's the point. They're prejudiced. Yeah, the court was incredibly one-sided. Like, the only way she was going to get out of it was when it became that decision. Like, as the defendant said, it's a start. Like, the court should have been one-sided. The only reason I think you can let Una off is because it was the decision: you can follow the law and prosecute someone, or you can follow the law and save and help someone and be the Starfleet that you're supposed to be, because we know you're not. And yeah, and that choice, I mean, these are still Starfleet officers. Like, you can't be presented with that after everything we've saw in the court case and not make the right choice. As I said, my only change: make them have to deliberate it for ages. Like, actually show that there was a significant time gap rather than implying it between, like, that they had to deliberate. That'd be my one change. If they attacked him on the stand at this point is like saying it to the other captain. And sure, they just cut it for time. I don't think you needed it. I don't think Pike could have added anything that wasn't already there. We've had longer episodes of Star Trek. This one's 57 minutes. We've had longer. With Paramount Plus, time is less of a factor. I think we've had, like, 90-minute episodes, but I don't... Like, I'm sitting here as a reviewer going, I don't know what I can add to the discussion on prejudice. I think they just covered it completely enough. Yeah, but the problem with putting Pike on the stand is then it stops being a civil rights issue. It stops being something about prejudice, and um, it becomes the captain breaking the law. And not only is there no chance they're gonna win that, but it it's missing the point, and it would have been a loss. Like even if Pike won the case, where you lied to Starfleet, but we're gonna let you off, that is still a loss because that's not the point. The core point here is that Starfleet has a prejudice against the genetically engineered for any reason. Um, yeah. And I think this episode helps make a smooth transition. Like in Enterprise, there was literally no genetic engineering. I don't know what it is in TOS, but sometimes between Enterprise and TNG, they allow genetic engineering for life-threatening reasons. Like they correct the spine of B'Elanna's baby, and some other stuff they mentioned. Like it is a laxing over centuries of the genetic engineering rules. But I think this really this was just such a good episode. Yeah, I like the frame we framed it. I love this episode. Thank you. It's the best. I'd have to check what like Enterprise aired from 2003 to 2005, but it might be the best episode of Star Trek in 20 years. It's certainly high on that list. It's what I want Strange New Worlds to be. It was Strange New Worlds without any of its problems, but also just everything it did was perfect. It did so many levels, and God, it was perfect. It starts about who stands up to the laws and why it should start with the captains, and they would be fighting for the right to be that. Yeah, this is why I might have liked this scene to go on a bit longer. Like, but when Pike said, "But what if the law is wrong?" I would have liked more of an exploration of that in this scene. You can argue that the entire episode somewhat explores that, but I think it's much more in line with the core point of the prejudice than like some of the other things. But this episode isn't about the law, it's about the prejudice. And so that like it is related. I would have liked a little more discussion, but I don't know where the limit is, and I'm not going to really complain too much that it's not there. But it is a great topic for a Star Trek episode. Like, what do you do when the law is wrong? I mean, a lot of Prime Directive episodes are like that. But it'd basically be an episode a lot like this. It's pretty similar on the surface, but at the core, it is arguing a different issue, I think. The prejudice comes from the augment wars on Earth because of the eugenics wars, and this episode did an absolutely fantastic job justifying why. Because it was always stupid. It was so... Like, every time I've talked about genetic engineering, I have had to say the words, if we are going with the Star Trek canonical explanation that superior ability inherently breeds superior ambition, that any kind of genetic engineering inherently increases your aggression, yada yada. I've had to say that because it's such a ridiculous assertion. First off, anyone ever known the kid in school who could have done anything they wanted, go to any university they wanted, and put their intelligence to determining exactly how much work they had to do to get a 70% and pass the class? And they would do it exactly. They wouldn't leave themselves any buffer room because they know that they're smart enough to get exactly as many points as they need to on the test. It's not even arrogance, they're just right. I've known people like that. But yeah, like it can kind of make sense with the augments. It was very dodgy, kind of like Nazi scientist vibes. I mean, it's eugenics, like, but along the lines of we're gonna do all these dubious stuff. We're gonna enhance these people, like damn all the safeguards, like screw the consequences. It was dubious science, and it created big con like people. I meant Genghis Khan, but yeah, Khan Noonien Singh. That is how eugenics genetic engineering had always been presented, and it was always kind of absurd. Like Flock said on Denobula, we do basic genetic engineering. Bashir isn't some homicidal maniac. Dal isn't either. This episode, and that's always something I kind of had to struggle with until, hey, look, I've put this scene on. I wonder why. I was like, I'm after balancing, because, like, is fiction. Star Trek can technically say whatever it wants. As absurd as it is, because we don't have that level of genetic engineering technology, they can just say, hey, you genetically engineer someone, they become violent. You know, you can just say that. And this episode scene was the one that made me sit back and go, like, no, yeah, like, you're absolutely right. They're like, the only reason you think that, you have those conceptions, are because they've taught it to you. Both in the meta context of, yeah, the only reason I would even consider something like that is because I've seen Star Trek, is because I've heard that version of the story. And from the in-universe perspective of, yeah, it's bogus. Like, Khan and those people those high-profile ones were the way they were. You know, maybe they even weren't. That's a thing. Like, maybe Khan and all of them were genetically super aggressive and warlike because their genetic engineering was done poorly. The scientists increased aggression and a lot of stuff like that without any consideration of what that would do, and it led to cons. But Khan, as we see him, the only time he's like some homicidal maniac is in the movie, where he's just spent like several decades stranded in hell, like basically had his life shattered, his love murdered, all because of Kirk. And he's very prejudiced against Kirk, but none of the other augments are. The other augments like, Khan, what the hell are you doing? We've got the Genesis device, let's go. It's equally possible that a few high-profile cases put that picture in people's mind. There could be plenty of augments in the eugenics wars times that were just people. You know, you can make tons of parallels to the real world. Look at World War II with the Japanese Pearl Harbor, so America builds internment camps. You know, you have a lot of Russia declares war on Ukraine, and suddenly Russians all over the world are being mistreated, and people are throwing that against them. The Muslims bomb the Twin Towers, suddenly Islamophobia. Like, you know, this sort of thing happens, and I love this conversation because it also kind of dismantled that stupid Star Trek argument. It's like, no, it's the first time it kind of slammed it down in front of me. It was like, no, this is just prejudice. Like, the only reason you think these, because yeah, look at Leon. I said before, a descendant of Khan doesn't make a lot of sense because she would be genetically engineered. And yeah, I feel maybe this should have been brought up in the episode, but I get why Leon wouldn't want to put herself out there. Leon carries a lot of Khan's genes and stuff, and she's not a homicidal maniac. She's not Khan. The only reason he thinks he might be Khan is because she spent her whole life having people tell her about that. Augmented individuals because of the eugenics wars. It's not ridiculous. Seems like the natural progression. We are animals after all. No. Why? You say your argument is it seems like the natural progression. My argument is no, that's nonsensical. Like, you have to give a reason. As I said at the start, the very first lines of the prosecution were slippery slope logical fallacy. If you don't know, if you can't derive it from the name, the slippery slope logical fallacy is that it basically, if you say the words, it's a slippery slope when X, it's presenting some small change or some act that will then inevitably lead to disastrous consequences. That's a logical fallacy. It's just a falsehood. You'd need a lot more to justify how your one act would lead to the absolute end of the world. The prosecution here says, I don't remember their exact words, of course, but it's along the lines of, like, some, genetic mutations might be harmless. And yeah, like, fixing a serious medical issue in a fetus. Una's boosted immune system, are going to be harmless. And he's like, but if we start allowing, like, those little things, the harmless stuff, then suddenly we're going to have the eugenics wars and all of society collapse and the Federation will crumble and we'll all die under the oppressive boot of authoritarian cons. It's like, what? No, that's the argument. That is the argument on the ban of genetic engineering. And, like, eventually, I imagine sometime shortly after this, is when the Federation goes, yeah, that's dumb. We're gonna let medical usage of genetic engineering go, but, like, not any of the super strength, like, crazy ability stuff. Yeah, that you've gotten rid of your slippery slope logical fallacy, because you've realized it's a logical fallacy. It's just wrong. Like, you don't have to justify. But that's what Star Trek's eugenics policy has always been. It's been based on a slippery slope logical fallacy and the absurd assertion, like the easily provably false assertion, that superior ability breeds superior ambition. Yes, the people who we see taking, like, the Khan, the Khan Noonien Singh, the Genghis Khan, the Hitler, the Mussolinis of the world, are going to be ambitious, because someone who's not ambitious wouldn't, like, get to that position. But there's plenty more people who, like, theoretically could. They could become a world leader. They could become, I don't know, the top of their class at Oxford. They could do all this stuff. They just really don't want to bother. And, like, you're not going to hear about those people because they don't want to bother. They're not going to bother making themselves worth being heard about, because they don't have the ambition. Jexla, I think if it's AI or genetic, it's all a way of leading us to an end, or change you doesn't come back from. All will change is scary, so we just turn the wheel. Like, they all get a turn to be held back and a turn to catch up, and that time in between changes over time. Yeah, so if that is true, this did fit it if it was all the AI over genetics. I'm not sure exactly what you're getting at. But yeah, I think it's important to plan for the future, as much as we as a species are pretty bad at it. But there's a great thing I saw about ChatGPT. It was like a business meeting where someone's like, please, can you tell me, like, what our usage might be for ChatGPT? It's like, oh, like, I don't know, it could help us with yada yada yada. It's like, can you tell us, like, what might be the effects of adopting ChatGPT into our business? It's like, well, we don't exactly know if there might be security risks, and we also not really sure how integrating it might affect the quality of our product or, like, the quality of our code, and we're also not really exactly sure how we might integrate it, and we're also not really sure if ChatGPT is usually right or usually wrong, or what effects that would have. And I was like, can you is there anything you can tell me about ChatGPT? And they were like, yes, we want to integrate it into our business as much and as quickly as possible. It's like, yeah, maybe we should think about this a little bit before. But no, the Allurian case specifically is different as well, because, like, this isn't planning for the future. This isn't humanity looking at the tools we have, like, right now today and going, like, in the next few decades we could probably get some serious genetic engineering going. Where do we want to draw the line? Like, what do we want to do with this? How do we want to go about this without, like, leading to problems? Which is something we've never been good at planning. This is like, hey, these people have this system and it works, and they're clearly not doing the eugenics wars, and in fact they need this system to survive on their planets. We're gonna get rid of it because it's bad, and it could lead to the eugenics wars again and collapse our society. It's like, well, no. It's, yeah. It's just, it's a it's a slippery slope logical fallacy. That's what Star Trek's genetic engineering policy always has been. Actually, see the points of Khan, Nooney, and Singh principles. It comes from logic. I don't remember. It's the classic authoritarian stuff, isn't it? Like, the idea of the benevolent dictator. I saw a fascinating... It was one of the, like, not half as interesting, I don't think. Windover Productions, maybe. One of the Latin American, maybe South American countries... is basically doing that. They've essentially got a democratically elected benevolent dictator. I don't remember. Maybe you can find... I want to say El Salvador, but I also don't want to get it totally wrong. But it's... I think the problem with that, the benevolent dictator idea, is that the benevolent dictator is always going to die, either through assassination or just old age. And it's not... The idea of a benevolent autocracy just isn't sustainable over time. And the quote... The point I was getting at is the quote from that video that really stuck with me was that the idea of the benevolent dictator is making long-term sacrifices for short-term gain. You might have an incredibly stable, a very good, like, dictatorship for the lifetime of your dictator, maybe even for several lifetimes, but eventually that power will get exploited. And the idea of a democracy, or a republic, or anything that's much more dependent on the system than the individuals in the system, is you're making short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. A democracy is very bad at reacting to things. A democracy can often have, and we see it'll have prejudices, sometimes for centuries before they're dealt with. I mean, look at America, that was founded with slavery problems, and the response was, let's put it off for, like, 80 years. And then we had a civil war about it. And then we mostly outlawed slavery. And then we just built up racial tensions for, like, a century before it started exploded. But we then really dealt with that for a few decades. And now we've got our own problem. Like... But eventually you get there, is kind of the point of the democracies and the republics and the systems, is that it's a lot harder to exploit them, and eventually you should get there. And I think that's kind of what the Starfleet thing is going for as well, is they have prejudice, and as the defendant has pointed out, they have very good reasons to have this prejudice. Like, they have founded their utopia in stark contrast against the genetically engineered, because the genetically engineered literally ended the world. Earth's pursuit of genetic engineering ended the world. And then Earth used that, like, the idea of getting away from that to found utopia. It doesn't make them right. It means that you can understand why they have that prejudice. But Starfleet will get there eventually, and we can know that. But that's, like... That's the point. The thing that saves the Leon in this episode is the system that sometime a long time ago, somebody with great intelligence wrote this clause that was like, hey, no, you have to give them asylum. Where am I in the comments? So we did not let that one out of the box as fast as in Star Trek. Back in the 80s, you're young. We were chewing stuff in this. I'm sorry, Jacksaw. I don't know why I have such a hard time reading your comments. You might notice from the Game Rant video and some of the other times. Sometimes I do this, but I don't know why. I'm not, like, dyslexic or anything. I just sometimes... They outlawed a lot of stuff back then, and... in the few that went to the other side. Yeah, I mean, I could go a lot into this. How long have we got? Well, it's been an hour. I could go into some of my thoughts of genetic engineering after this, but I mean, I think we're in for a reckoning in the next decades, in the next centuries or stuff, unless immortality is actually impossible, which we have no reason to believe that it is, and every reason to believe that it would be. Genetic engineering and that sort of stuff is kind of inherently going to become an issue. Because even if you outlaw it, there's going to be people who want to do it and do it anyway. And especially if they can make themselves immortal or longer lived or whatever, like, it's just a matter of time before they become the majority. And it's going to be a growing. It's not the time. This is more about prejudice and episode in general than genetic engineering. Um, That's correct. I love your takes. You take a lot of consideration in your analysis. Thank you. I don't think democracy is the best political system. It's just the least harmful we have found so far. Yeah, I mean, I think America's democracy. I remember when I did AP US politics, I think was the course, which if you're international viewers, you don't know, AP is basically, it's advanced placement. It's in high school. You'll do college level work. Sometimes even beyond college level work in the high school. And it was the first time I'd really delved into the how the American political system works. Obviously, I knew the three branches. I kind of knew what they all did. But the actual kind of day-to-day, like, how do they function, as opposed to just what they do, I was like, God, literally everything about this seems to be the worst possible way to do this system. I had an incredibly biased textbook that was like, all rah-rah, America's great. And even that textbook had to concede sometimes that the way we were doing it was a bit odd, and that, like, England or Europe or whatever would have a better system. It's fascinating. But even, like, the balance of power, how the three balance, it's like, the legislative branch can balance the judicial branch by having total control over the judicial branch. I'm like, don't take that example at heart, because I don't remember exactly those day-to-days. But I was like, God, everything about this seems awful. But, no, I think we do get there. I mean, even then, we do get there, I guess, is the point. But also, I don't remember many of Khan's philosophies. Like, why does Khan think genetic engineering is good? Maybe he's right. Even I don't know what extent I think genetic engineering should have in our society. Like, should we genetically engineer ourselves to be stronger, to have a better immune systems, to I don't know, whatever, to have better endurance. And we just know objectively that there aren't going to be, like, adverse side effects, or, like, by boosting our immune system, we accidentally make ourselves vulnerable. I feel like boosting our immune system, that sounds good, but, like, making us stronger just because, I don't know how I feel about that, but I also can't tell you why. Like, I can't give you a good reason of why we shouldn't, other than it doesn't really feel right. And what that means, if you ever have an opinion like that, it means that it is probably some kind of prejudice or just cultural thing, or essentially it's nonsensical. And that eventually, at some point in the future, society's going to change and just accept it. Because if you can't justify why, it's not going to persist. Maybe it is Star Trek that influenced that. Maybe it's other things. But, like, other thing, should you be able to genetically engineer your eye color? Should you be able to genetically engineer your hair color? If you say no, then do you have a problem with dyeing your hair? Because what's the difference? You know, I think as I've thought about this a lot more, I've become much more accepting of the idea of, like, yeah, genetically engineer your hair, your eyes, whatever. That makes sense. But even, like, I'm autistic. Do I have the right is one question. And then, should I genetically engineer autism out of any kid I have? I don't know. I don't know. If you could know the severity ahead of time, that'd probably make it a better decision, but it could be rather harmless, like I have. It could mean they'll never live a normal life. It could have been an integral part that they loved about themselves. It could have been something that they loathed their whole life that I never removed. It's a very complicated issue. Not in this case, of course, with Una and stuff. I think it's a very simple issue. But, like, yeah, this wasn't an exploration of genetic engineering. This was an exploration of prejudice through that veil. But I mean, yeah, even I have very strong opinions about genetic engineering, but I don't know to the extent that they go. Like, I feel we'd actually have to start trying to do it in order to figure out how to do it right. I mean, and I was saying earlier, it's a good idea to plan, and it is. But, I mean, I don't know what to do about genetic engineering. Like, I don't know. Let's try it out a bit and then see where it goes. It's morality. This is why we've been around for a good 10,000 years, is something more than animals, and we're still wondering how to do it. It's very easy to do morality at the high level. It can get difficult when you actually try and figure out how to implement it. And that's the other thing, making us more intelligent. I don't know. I don't know why. There's something in me that those sort of things, like objective improvements, but just kind of there's no reason to do it. I mean, there's benefits. This is the thing. I can't really explain why. That means it's probably some prejudice or bias or cultural whatever. But it almost feels scary. Like, it's such a big thing. Like, that would have such a profound effect on our society. But like, I'm a proponent for immortality. Genetically, what's the difference? How can you affect society more than immortality? But like, okay, you want to genetically engineer people to be more intelligent. I'd be surprised if you could do that for people who are already alive, because the brain is largely, as it's like, the brain doesn't make a lot of changes to itself after you're born, and certainly after, like, 20 something, sometime in your 20s, it's just kind of your brain like that. So does that mean we have a century or so where some people are just don't have the mental capacity of the genetically engineered and are inferior at everything? Like, that doesn't feel right. But do we have the right to deny every future generation what could be a far better society than just be so that those few generations don't feel left out? The same goes for increased strength or all that stuff. Like, what are actually the consequences of these incredibly far-reaching decisions? What do you mandate the increased intelligence? And even do we how much do you have to guarantee it's safe? If we don't mandate, do you have the right to deny it from your child if they can never get it later in life? Like, it's genetically engineered. When you actually get into those sorts of things, you want to make your hair pink? Go ahead. Genetically engineer your hair to be pink. We could probably genetically engineer it back. Like, that's fine. But those things are they're almost scary in how big they are in scope. This is why people say, why don't we just look ahead? We could have planned this so much better. We knew it was coming. It's like, well, it's how do you actually do these things? How do you plan them without knowing what's going to happen? Yeah. Okay, I want to teach that in schools, how easy it would be to breed out, how and why your child would change. Yeah, and I feel, Jack Slaw, thanks for joining me. It's been a good discussion. But what was I gonna say? I think why I praise a lot of the things like Stranger Worlds and Prodigy, and maybe even to a lesser extent from the past, they didn't mean it, but things like Bashir, is these stories right now, I think, are influencing not just us, but particularly with Prodigy, like the generations that are going to actually have to deal with those questions that right now are interesting hypotheticals, but in 40 years or something, but within a century, there's a very real possibility these are going to be like the Supreme Court cases. These are going to be what people, like how we talk about climate change. That's what those people are going to talk about. And these stories, I think, are doing fantastic work actually exploring these issues and being like, this is why abstinence is the wrong answer. We might not know where the limit is. We might not know when it becomes the wrong answer. But abstinence is the wrong answer. And here are the warnings of how to try and avoid the prejudice. Here are the warnings of, here's trying to get you to accept that there might be other ways. Here's getting you used to the idea. And I think, intentional or not, as I said, this is not an episode about genetic engineering. This is an episode about prejudice. But the fact that it's through the genetic engineering framework, everything else about Una as a character, same with Dao, I think is less about prejudice and very much is about the genetic engineering prejudice. I think they're doing great work. I really do. And I think whenever genetic engineering comes to a head, especially if in the next few decades, people are going to point to these episodes like Doctor Who, The Green Death. It's a very climate, it's aware of climate change and like what was happening in the 70s. Yes. And people are like, oh, so ahead of its time. It's so relevant now. That's what this episode is going to be. They're going to show it in classrooms and they're going to talk about how amazing it is that like you see all the people you know and your friends and family and various, characters in this episode, which I mean maybe it'll all come and I'll be totally proven wrong, but I think it was perfection. It's the first true perfection award. Okay, I did say there were some things you can improve, but it feels the most perfect of the things I've given perfection awards to. Drew, if given the option, everyone will say yes, becoming a Superman as long as the product is safe. I don't know if I would. I really don't know if I would. Like, yeah, if we could just guarantee that there's going to be no side effects whatsoever, like, that's a long think for me, and that's an even longer think for, like, my child, an unborn child, or, something like that. It is definitely not in everyone. There's also the super religious groups who are probably going to be more prone to being against genetic engineering, against, they think it might go against God's will or Allah's will or whatever your deity of choice would be. There's going to be people who just philosophically don't like it. There's going to be people like me who go, I can't really tell you why, but I don't know how I feel about this, and I'm not going to do it. It's not going to be a universal thing. I am not sure that anything can truly be said to be a universal human experience. And certainly no decision can be universal. If I had $1 for every universal human thing that I don't experience, relate to, or have, I mean, I wouldn't have too many dollars, but I could have a great week. David C., working at the moment, so gonna listen more a little later, but great insight as always. Thank you, David C. Thank you for the $20. Not as much as I would, well, actually, probably pretty close to as much as I would have if I had $1 for every supposedly universal human experience I don't have. So there you go. David C. has just given me my $1 for every single universal human experience I don't have. But yeah, I mean, it might be popular. It might take off. But then there's also the things of when we actually implement it, I mean, it's cutting edge technology that's absolutely amazing. It's going to be expensive as hell. And then that doesn't seem moral. Like, if we're talking immortality, that's going to be expensive as hell when we first make it. But, I mean, that's just a recipe for outrage and, I mean, God. And even if you ignore, like, the crazy expensive things, like, there's already plenty of economic disparity between traditionally marginalized races, communities, just whatever. This is just add on top of that. Like, that, even if we could perfectly add it and everyone was okay with it, how we distribute it is another question entirely. How would you rate this episode 10 out of 10? Can I go higher than 10 out of 10? I mean, perfect. I gave it a perfection award. How would I rate this episode? Perfect. It may be the most perfect episode of television I've ever seen. It was perfect as an episode. It was perfect as Strange New Worlds. It was perfect as Star Trek. It was perfect as sci-fi. It was perfect as an exploration of prejudice. It was perfect technically. It was perfectly directed. The lighting was perfect. The music, and more often the lack thereof, was perfect. The pace, perfect. The sets, perfect. The costumes, perfect. Everything about this episode was perfect. That is how I would rate it. The morality of this episode, perfect. Yeah, I can't stress this enough. This is one of the best episodes of Star Trek there is. It's certainly, I mean, I'd have to check, but it could be the best episode in 20 years. It can often be hard because there's so many great episodes. Like, is this better than The Visitor? I don't know. The Visitor is a lot more emotional. The Visitor is doing something totally different. Like, this is the best apple, The Visitor's the best orange. What do you want me to say? The questions Wade were so wise. Even, like, a lot of the things we've discussed in the past hour weren't raised by this episode. This entire discussion about genetic engineering, this episode never approaches that. It never asks, what's the limit? It never asks, are Una's genetic augments, acceptable? Are they good? Are they healthy? Will they have a detrimental effect to society? This episode doesn't give a damn. This episode says it's a cultural practice that doesn't hurt Una, so why not? This episode says, hey, you're incredibly prejudiced. Maybe we should deal with this. It's an episode that raises so many wise questions. It explores them wisely. It displays them wisely. It shows wisely, and it wisely doesn't tell. And it spurs off a lot of incredible wise discussions, and it will keep doing that as time goes on. Doesn't matter what prejudices we might find. Doesn't matter the time. If there are prejudices, you can take this episode, apply it to those prejudices, and raise interesting questions, and maybe make the world a better place. Maybe make someone's life a little bit better. Like, that's the best thing an episode of television can do, really. Is just make the world a little bit better. It doesn't necessarily have to. It could just be entertaining, but I think this episode nails it. This was peak Strange New Worlds. I mean, it's telling, I think, that the only other episode of Strange New Worlds I would rate nearly this good is Ghosts of Illyria, which is basically the prequel. This is perfect in how it integrates into Star Trek. In its little sequel-pequel setting, it sets up Bashir and Dal without kind of inserting itself, like the whole Spock and Burnham thing. It elaborates on the past, on Archer's augment arc. It helps, for the first time ever, I understand why Starfleet has this prejudice, despite how obviously flawed it is. And I understand why it fades with time, because it's nonsensical, it's a slippery slope logical fallacy, but also, by Bashir's time, the eugenics wars were, what, 300 years ago? Like, look at now. It is exactly the opposite, but the World War II was 80-ish years ago. I'm not going to count it, but, you know, it's a little less than a century ago. And the 1950s, 60s, you know, you'd be very much against any kind of Nazism, authoritarianism, whatever, but a lot of those ideas kind of creep back with time. It's still living memory. I've spoken with 3 Holocaust survivors, 2 prisoners of Auschwitz, but, you know, this is the opposite example where prejudice fades with time. The thing that caused the prejudice is going away. It's not as much of a memory, so you're left with your flimsy arguments. I thought season 2 was going to flop, but I was proven wrong. I didn't enjoy episode 1. Oh, I was sure it would be a success generally. I thought, and still do think, on base, it might be a little worse than Strange New Worlds season 1. But if they can pull off anything half as good as this, as I said, this was Strange New Worlds without its fundamental problems. And beyond that, it nailed everything. If it produces, like, episodes half as good as this going on, it's going to be way better. but it's just those fundamental problems for me. I very much enjoyed watching Strange New Worlds Season 1. Remembering Strange New Worlds Season 1 is a different story. And they're going a little darker. They're pushing it in directions that were the things I tended to... They seem like they're doubling down on a lot of the things I personally didn't like about Season 1. But if it pleases everyone else in the world but me, I mean, that's my problem. I acknowledge that. But you're here because you want to hear what I have to say. So I'm going to tell you what I have to say. But we'll see. I mean, the good thing about an episodic series of television is you can have this perfection among utter garbage if you want. The first episode was fine. I went over it a lot. It had some problems. It had some other things, but they can, even if, like, what this episode proves is even if they never get rid of their fundamental problems, we can still have episodes that do. And we can still hit those absolute heights. So, yeah, I mean... It's episodic Star Trek. It's weird for me, because this is the first episodic Star Trek I have lived through contemporarily. I guess that's not true. Lower Decks is more episodic than not. Prodigy... But this is more episodic, is like classic Star Trek was. You've got those running themes, but still very more episodic. I think more so than Lower Decks and Prodigy. Maybe it's the way they do it as well, where they're exploring, like, topical modern issues. So when, like, Voyager would be a roller coaster of quality, it was fine, because I had, like, all 200, 300 episodes already. It's different going through it normally. Not normally, at the time. But, yeah, this was perfect. That's all I'll have to say. It was so perfect, I literally couldn't add the discussion of prejudice. Yeah, it covered all its bases, which is awful as a reviewer, but I think we'll wrap it up there then, because I think we are drawing to a close, and I'm starting to repeat myself. Oh, sorry, let me glance through, because I didn't finish my my little go through of the scene by scenes. Not too much in here. She takes a stand. I talked about this scene a lot. They're listening to the court case. That's the final closing things. Closing statements. That was nice. The little hug at the end. But yeah, I think I've covered all my bases. This episode was so grown up, it felt like a Star Trek episode TOS. Wasn't campy enough, I think, for TOS. But no, it was peak Star Trek. Not every episode of Star Trek should be like this. That'd be a bit weird. But you need the episodes like this for it to keep being Star Trek. You also need episodes where, like, you go play baseball with the Vulcans, but you equally need episodes like this. Well done. 10 out of 10. Perfection. I can't say that enough. But yeah, with that then, I think I will say, don't forget, Prodigy is not going to be on Paramount Plus within the next few days, apparently. I don't know when. That was from TrekCore. I saw the few days report. So if you want to watch Prodigy, the second half, but you can buy the first 10 episodes on Blu-ray. I'd recommend doing that sooner rather than later. If you want to watch the last 10 episodes for potentially the last time ever, if you want to somehow preserve them, I don't know how you could do that. Like, the only way I could think is record them, but of course that's illegal, and so you can't do it. It'd be immoral, and of course against terms of service to encourage, but yeah, it's very possible there will never be a legal way to watch Prodigy again, so you might want to get onto that. But then, yeah, let's check. What is next episode? Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Memory Alpha. God, I almost forgot the name of Memory Alpha. I Google things that start with Star Trek so often, I often go to Google something completely unrelated, and we'll start it with Star Trek. Like, I don't know, Star Trek, how to change a car tire. Oh, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. That's gonna be the, one where it looks like they either go back to, 20th century America, like the American South. Little odd after a Prejudice episode, but I mean, you don't have to cover it, I guess. Or Parallel Earth. I'd be happy if my Parallel Earth theory gets proven right. Is there a picture? Leon travels back in time to 21st century Earth. Well, now we know. No, is this the Kirk one? We're gonna get some Paul Wesley Kirk with Leon? That'd be my guess. Maybe we'll get some Paul Wesley. Will he be better? Because someone pointed out that, the Kirk we see in the season 1 finale is a Kirk who never captained the Enterprise. Like, he could potentially be quite different from the Kirk we see in Strange New World season 2. And while I'm quite an optimistic person, I would love that amount of blind optimism. But no, it'll be a different Kirk. We know that much, but we'll get to see prime timeline Paul Wesley Kirk for the first time. So there'll be some stuff to discuss there, I am sure. God, is it weird that I'm jealous of myself? Just look at that thumbnail me. I want that. I want everything about that. Thanks for watching.